I grew up as a Navy junior, so kind of traveled the country. I went to high school in Maryland, where I met my would-be wife. I went to the Naval Academy, graduated in 1971, just as we were coming down off of the Vietnam War. Was commissioned in the Marine Corps, spent 12 years in active duty in the Marines. 83, I transitioned from the active duty Marine Corps into the reserves and started at the entry level of the aerospace industry. Sometimes I refer to it as below the entry level. I was a salesman, peddler, selling electronics equipment. And because Judy, who was kind enough and supportive enough, along with my son, was willing to move around a bit, we moved around the country, took on a variety of different assignments and opportunities and risks, as you would expect. Moved here, and here being Bedford, New Hampshire in 1999, was recruited by Lockheed Martin from Raytheon to run what was then a company called Sanders Associates, and helped Sanders regain its footing. We had lost, as a lot of people in the aerospace industry did during the late 90s, mid-late 90s, kind of lost their way trying to figure out being a commercial, not commercial kind of entity. And spent 5 years there. We transitioned to BAE Systems. I was asked to help sell the company from Lockheed Martin. BAE Systems was one of the acquirers. It turned out they were the high bidder, but they were also, all three of the companies that were bidding for Sanders at the time, two of the three were serious about considering moving it out of the state. And the leadership team at Sanders and I worked very, very hard to sell the state. And so when BAE Systems was the eventual acquirer, they decided to leave the company here in the state as opposed to integrate it with other parts of their business. In fact, we started integrating other parts of BAE Systems here to New Hampshire and what have you. Eventually fleeted up, so to speak, to run all of BAE Systems, North America, and several other foreign components, South Africa, the UK, the UK electronics piece, Sweden, Turkey, and what became what known as BAE Systems Inc., which was a $20 billion, 56,000 person enterprise. Retired from there 5 years ago at age 60, and was recruited to run a company called SAIC, Science Application International Corporation. At the time was headquartered out in La Jolla, California. First week on the job, I transitioned it to McLean, Virginia, which was right across the river from where our headquarters was at BAE Systems. Commuting all that time from Alton, New Hampshire. And after 5 years of commuting, 2.5 years at SAIC, Judy and I decided that was about as much of that as we needed, and retired. So 2.5 years ago, retired. Last summer, my son, who lived in Bedford with his wife, who was from Derry, and our two granddaughters, who at the time were 2 and 4 years old, called me and said, "Dad, I'm looking at a new opportunity. I can either move down to Massachusetts or I can move to Texas." Neither of those were pleasant alternatives for us, and one of the questions he and I talked about, where are the opportunities for you here in New Hampshire? And he said he didn't really have opportunities. He too was in the aerospace business, and so I recommend to him, if you're going to make a change, make only one change in your life at a time. Make a move or make a job change, but don't try to do them simultaneously. Having done that myself many times, I know how challenging that can be with two little kids in his case. So he stayed with Elbit Systems of America, where he was working in Merrimack, and moved to Fort Worth, Texas. And my wife was chagrined at me, to say the least, taking our two granddaughters to Texas. But but it was the opportunity. And I said, if you're going to move, if you're going to see if move works for you, you better do it when the kids are young enough that you can, you can adjust. They're much more adjustable. My son had gone to 7 schools, public and parochial, growing up. When we moved here in 1999, it was our 16th move in 28 years. So I certainly didn't want to wish that on him, unless he really understood what he was getting into. Finished my Marine Corps career in '99 as a reserve, and Charlie Bass retired me, so to speak, at my home in Bedford at the time, and I was very, very fortunate to have spent 28.5 years with Marines. So, my life has been blessed with the opportunity for 41 years, to work with some of the most magnificent young people in and out of uniform, doing, frankly, just 2 simple things, and that's defending our country or protecting the country against those who would harm us. And so, whether I was in the aerospace industry or whether I was in the Marine Corps, my life was pretty much, as was my wife, focused around what I'd grown up doing as in the Naval Academy and subsequently in the Marine Corps. So that's how I got here in a kind of roundabout way. But back to last summer, what caused me to get, and I'm not a you've heard my story. Never been involved in politics, but it was very clear to me that New Hampshire, that we were selling, the leadership team at Sanders was selling in '99 as we were going through the divestiture process, and the New Hampshire we have today, it was very different economically. And so my focus, and the reason I'm running is really very simple, is to provide leadership to work with the legislature to create an economic environment where jobs can be created in the private sector. We were bringing in jobs in '99, and I was actually bringing technology out of Texas and Massachusetts into New Hampshire, growing product lines, and that seems to have died. And so in looking into that, there are things that we can do, I think, to stimulate our economy here in New Hampshire with the right drive and leadership. I've kind of laid that out in a plan called 8-15-17 equals 25,000, and the idea is to create an environment where 25,000 private sector jobs can be created in 2.5 years. And I picked that date. It's not accidental. When I came to Sanders, what we realized is that Sanders had gotten very diversified as a company by virtue of the downsizing in the military and the appropriate budget constraints we had in the '90s. And as a result of that, they were having a hard time making their performance objectives. And I don't mean performance objectives in terms of making money. I'm talking about performance objectives and satisfying customers. And I was very surprised to see how difficult things had come here at Sanders. So the leadership team, we got together and we said, look, if we can get focused around things that are most important to our most important customers, we believe, which would require a bit of a culture shift for us, I believe we can turn this thing around, and they believed we could turn it around, and we did. And I give an example that one of the things we had to focus on is setting the first priority of the enterprise around what was the most important project we had of the hundreds of projects we were working on. And if nothing else, make sure our commitment on that project was met. And that project, we were doing software for the F-22 fighter jet for Lockheed Martin. That was our #1 customer. The F-22 fighter jet was Lockheed Martin's #1 project for their #1 customer, which is the United States Air Force. And the F-22 fighter jet was also the country's #1 military modernization program at the time. And we set a date certain to deliver that software of 8/15/00. And that date became a cultural icon for the company. We had 300 people working on that project, but 3,600 people knew how important it was. In fact, had we not met that date, that program would have been in jeopardy of being canceled. So very, very important, not just to our customers, but to the country. and it fundamentally changed how the company thought about its performance and the people. We also at the same time had to get much more focused, eliminate all the distractions. We couldn't be everything to everyone. Got rid of our product lines in the commercial sector because frankly they were not in our core business, and so we had to get very, very focused. And as a result of that, we developed confidence in our ability to perform, fundamentally changed the reputation of the company, because 815 not only was an internal objective within Sanders at the time, it was a known objective from the Secretary of Defense right on down through our customer chain. So very, very important for us that leadership team did a great job in focusing on that. And at the same time, we were going through divestiture. Being bought, and trying to keep our priorities straight, and going through the change of BAE Systems acquiring us. So it was something to be, as being part of that, I was very, very proud of what they did there. That formed the context around my vision for the state when it comes to economic growth and job creation. Create a date certain, create an objective that is achievable but challenging, and let's make sure we all focus on how we play our part in making that happen. When I say that, I mean both the private sector, but primarily the public sector. What are the things that we need to do to make that happen? Because there are a lot of things we have to do. There are a lot of services that we provide at the state and municipal level. But let's make sure we don't lose sight of if we're not creating jobs, if we're not growing the economy, frankly, we're gonna have some difficult times ahead of us. So,
to interrupt, but
sure.
We're almost out of time.
I'm sorry.
No, I was kidding. We do want to certainly have the background.
Sure.
But also, with a number of topics, would like to get your thoughts on
sure
as well.
And I'm happy to talk about anything. I may not have the answers for you on everything, because I pretty much am a meat and potatoes guy, focused primarily on the economic side of our state. But I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Sure. I was hoping you could speak to your perspective on healthcare reform as well as Medicaid expansion.
Yeah. I'm not. I've never been a big fan of one size fits all in healthcare, so I'm not I've never been a proponent for Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, and I'm not a fan of the and have opposed Medicaid expansion. Certainly the way we've done it here in the state. I would tell you this: I know that choice makes a difference, that having choice in not just healthcare providers, but insurers and doctors and the like is very, very important. Again, when BAE Systems acquired Sanders, they want us to go to one healthcare provider, one healthcare insurer, and I told them that I wouldn't support that. I said people in New Hampshire want choice, and as a result of that, I worked very, very hard, and eventually was successful in keeping Harvard Pilgrim as one of our options, and as one of the largest customers of Harvard Pilgrim, and sitting down with Charlie Baker back in 99, 2000, when we were going through that transition to BAE Systems, we were able to give him enough business to keep Harvard Pilgrim viable, and I've had that conversation with him more than one time over a 4 or 5 year period, because I believe for our employees, it was very, very, very important that they have choice in their health care options. And so the plans that the two providers gave us, one being Harvard Pilgrim, I think Cigna was the other at the time, was very in line with the culture of the enterprise, right? And I think sometimes if you're not sensitive to the culture of organizations, right? And that's why I talk about the cultural shift we had to make there, performance-wise. You'll inevitably get it wrong, because people at least my sense of my friends and neighbors and fellow citizens here in New Hampshire, choice, they equate to freedom, and having choice for them is important. So
just sort of rolling forward a bit
Yeah.
to follow up on that, but I assume your objection to, it sounds like one of your objections to the Affordable Care Act is the absence of choice here in New Hampshire.
yeah, absolutely.
And so there are a number of proposals to expand choice
Right.
next year. Would your objections be allayed by that?
Depends how they come out. If they do in fact give us broad choice, that will be very, very helpful. But if they come back with limited networks, limited doctor affiliations, all right, and don't really provide us broad-based choice, I'd be very, very disappointed. And I would work very, very hard to make sure it did have that broader extent. Because it can't be choice for a significant few, right? It's got to be choice for everybody, right? That's kind of the way I feel about it.
And then following up a bit on the Medicaid expansion
Yeah.
part of it, if New Hampshire, in your view, the way New Hampshire's gone about it is improper, the theory behind it was to try and get more people who couldn't afford health
Sure.
insurance onto health insurance. So is there an approach that you would advocate to address their needs? If Medicaid
Sure, we
expansion goes away?
have to be able to address the neediest of our population. There's no doubt about it. My sense is that Medicaid expansion was never thought through well enough to begin with, and that's why I opposed it from the beginning, and probably would have vetoed it. I've been the governor of the bill that we had. There were about 20,000 or so of the most needy that we needed to find access for and coverage for, right? And then we created policies, frankly, that I think are wrong, that put another 30-some thousand into Medicaid who had other alternatives I think were more appropriate. And that means they either had private insurance or they had access to the exchange under subsidies, right? So I don't think we took the right approach here. And I was opposed to Medicaid expansion writ large, and I was opposed to the particular law that we currently have, and it needs to be reformed, fixed, however you want to. We're not going to be able to afford it going forward as it is. We shouldn't be taking. We shouldn't be excited about the fact that we have more and more people on that program. We should be excited about the fact that we have less and less dependency on that program. And frankly, that's why I focus on the economic side. That's why I focus on creating good paying jobs here in the state, instead of having 106,000 of our citizens travel out of the state every day, commute out of the state to work. And a lot of our young people, that's happening. And so that's why I'm focused on the economy first. And that gives us the flexibility to deal with a lot of the other things that we're all concerned with, to include healthcare, right? And frankly, healthcare will be an integrated part of the overall economic growth of the state. I think sometimes, I don't know about y'all, but sometimes I get a sense that we're playing whack-a-mole in Concord, and that an issue comes up, we pound it down, another issue comes up, we pound it down. Health this month, energy this month, education this month, rather than take a long-term economic growth strategy that we can align all those things and integrate them, so that our education system is aligned in providing a conduit between education and employment needs, not just business needs, but overall employment needs, not-for-profit needs, public sector needs, as well as private sector needs. And sometimes I'm frustrated that we don't have a long-term view of what we want this to look like. That's kind of what I do. That's what I've been doing for 41 years, frankly, is taking real simple Marine Corps leadership tenets, keep it simple, focus on the significant few, make sure those get done, and get people aligned around making that happen. And that's how I see it in this case as well.
Are there parts of the Affordable Care Act that are currently in place or maybe coming online that you'd support continuing forward even if the whole act is repealed?
Yeah, I think everybody recognized there were some things that we needed to do, all right? and this is going to be a little personal, but I think it's appropriate. Pre-existing conditions, right? My son is type 1 diabetic, right, since the age of 14. For 12 years, I kept a separate insurance policy for catastrophic coverage for my son in the unlikely instance that he would lose coverage, either as a result of losing his job or something happening. And so, and I know I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. It was not easy. I was very disappointed when the Affordable Care Act caused the insurance company to cancel it. Right? Loss of choice, loss of option, and so now, my son is much more dependent on his. I have less choice in terms of helping him out in the future. I think the pre-existing condition aspect of that act makes sense to me. And frankly, I'm not an expert on the 2,700 pages. Haven't spent as much time thinking about that. But that's one area that I thought, Judy and I thought was appropriate. So as an example, my wife and I have been very involved in diabetes research, and Judy was chairman of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation here in New Hampshire, the New England chapter, and so we're very, very engaged in making sure we have a healthier society.
So you talked about looking at things in solving the whack-a-mole problem.
Yeah.
By trying to take an economic approach. So you have a plan for how we should best tax
Yes.
people and businesses and
Tax
such.
businesses in
So
particular. Yeah, my
why don't
plan.
you tell us a little
Yeah,
bit
my
about
8-15-17 plan equal 25,000 jobs is predicated on 3 phases. The first phase is creating an economic environment based on fundamental economic principles to reestablish what I saw here 15 years ago in New Hampshire Advantage. What enabled us to be the powerhouse economically in the region was we had a much more favorable business tax structure and much more favorable, in comparison, regulatory environment. And we actually had the states and the local communities were much more engaged in trying to create opportunities and develop economic growth. And today, for example, we're ranked, we have the 3rd highest business tax structure in the country, right? And so where before we were very competitive regionally, which is where we were competing for growing businesses and pulling technology into the state, today we're not that way. And we need, as I say, go back to the future, so to speak, if we're going to reestablish our economic viability. So I've proposed in that plan to reduce over 2 budget cycles our business profits tax from 8.5%, right, down to 7.4%. First step down to 7.9, then down to 7.4. And in doing that, we will be very, very competitive regionally. Right? At the same time, there's some, I've listed several areas of regulation that I'd like to see that pose hindrance as I've gone around the state to small business creation and small business growth. And with the idea that, again, if you make it an environment where people will consider starting in our state as opposed to next door or other places, and that they can see the tax structure going in the right direction, they'll make those investments. I know that for a fact because I know what those decision points look like for most business, whether small or big. I spun out 6 or 7 companies here in New Hampshire and 1 in Florida while I was at BA Systems in Nashua. And
so what are some of the specific things?
Well, I'll give you one off the top of my head is the real estate transfer tax, right? Right. We used to have an exception for small businesses who are going from an LLC to essentially a INC, right, to incorporate. And they had an exception, so when they reorganized that where they didn't really have a gain in terms of transfer of assets, we took an exception, and for small businesses, that allowed them to make those decisions on organizational restructuring and growth that frankly we removed a few years ago, and it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't affect companies like I was running, but it affected those small startups that we spun out. And so, because as they were trying to decide what the next step was for them, they always had that question. And I use that as one example. I've listed several others in my plan, but that's the first one that came to the top of my head because I heard that time and time again. There's another. We have some restrictions on capital. So if you're trying to go from, say, 5 shareholders, 10 shareholders to essentially an ESOP, right? We're very restricted in how we do that. Well, that's a very important tool for businesses who are trying to grow, that are trying to get their employees more engaged in their business, right? And share in the overall success of the enterprise. Well, it doesn't make sense that we would have those restrictions. Those are the things I'm looking at.
So as you're dropping taxes for businesses,
yep.
But I'm going to guess that businesses aren't going to know in advance, hey, on September 12th or this rate's going to drop. Let's open our business that day in New Hampshire.
Right.
There's going to be a lag between
Absolutely.
When those rates drop and when businesses see a better climate
Right.
in New Hampshire and decide they're
Yeah.
going to get here and do all of the logistics to do it.
Yep.
So what happens to state revenues in the meantime?
Well, the impact of my plan is about $40 to $50 million in state revenue, right? And that's equivalent to about what we're growing at right now, all right? And at about 0.8%, and which is pathetic. So I didn't assume we were going to get much better, much faster. But it'll send the right indicators, all right? Same time, I expect to keep our spending in line with that economic growth. It can't grow faster than the economic growth of the state, and which it has been. And at the same time, looking for efficiencies in our state government, organizational efficiencies, as well as just workout efficiencies. And I've set a 2.5% target in the budgeting process for creating efficiencies. And we haven't had a top-down, bottom-up review of our structure in over 2 decades. People have looked at it, but nobody's implemented it. And I intend to go beyond just looking at it and set realistic targets for efficiencies and effectiveness in state government.
So there's another aspect to taxation in New Hampshire, which is cities and towns, school districts, all rely on property taxes, which are very varied from community to community.
Mm-hmm.
That's a topic that occasionally reaches the level of the governor having to weigh in on.
Sure.
What do you think about how that is, or how better to, is there a better way to?
I don't know of a better way right now. I don't know of a better way because I like the idea of the city deciding how they're going to approach some aspect of their own economy, how they're going to approach their compensation and manning for their services. I think that makes sense. I would like to have that local control myself, and so that necessarily puts most of the burden on property tax revenue for that local control. It also puts competition in at the local level, right? And
But I just interject though, some of the property tax now goes to the state.
It does.
Education. So is that a rational way for the state to be raising it?
some of it goes to the state and goes right back to the communities, and some of it goes to the state.
Yeah, but it's not being set by the local
Oh, no,
community.
that's
And
right.
so is that a rational way?
I think it is.
Okay.
I think it is. Yeah, I mean, we got 400 members of the House there helping us decide how they want to do that, and that seems rational. What I really like about we had, and you all know this, even though you may have lived here all your life, having spent so much of my life growing up in other places and working in other places, we have such a unique form of democracy here, right? And the competitive nature of our citizens gives us great advantage if we want to take advantage of it. I look at economically, I look at what they're doing in London. Heck, I look at what we're doing here in Keene. All right, and it's, Londonderry rolled back its impact fees. Why? Because they wanted to attract business. And they did. They rolled back their regulatory process so they could get approvals faster. And they worked very closely, almost agonizingly difficult with the state, to get quick responses to new businesses that they wanted to grow in the town. What happened? Their tax base went broad. Their taxes on property went down. And they have one of the lowest tax rates in that part of the state. People ask me what we ought to be doing in Alton or where I live or Bedford. I say, I don't know, go over and ask Kevin Smith over in Londonderry. Why don't you pay attention to what he just did? And yeah, I know it's different, and each town has a different view of it. I'm okay with that. I think that's good. But there are great examples right here in our state of people who are communities. Tom Dolan heads the council there, town council. I mean, they've done just a tremendous job of dealing with property taxes through economic growth and job creation. And I applaud them for doing that.